Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage General Manager, Black Hat, Trey Ford.
Good morning. I didn't expect to see this many people awake yet. How are you guys doing this morning? You guys are awful upbeat this morning. Having a good show? Got a pretty good representation from around the world. Every year Jeff would review where we've got representatives, ignoring the United States and Canada, coming in at number 10, Denmark with 33 people, Norway with 38, Singapore 43, Brazil, Republic of Korea, Germany with 73, Israel 75, Australia 76, Japan's number 2, and Sweden is number 1 at 91 people. Right? It's interesting to see who is serious about security. We had a real challenge in preparing for the general, trying to figure out exactly what questions to ask, and it was great to reach out to the attendees. The general traveled here to meet with us, and so it was great to be able to reach out to our registered attendees, gather that information, pass it on, and represent you guys. It takes a lot of support to put on this show. I started in March last year, and it's been an amazing process to watch the team spend the entire year getting this organized. If I could take a quick moment, I'd like to ask for a round of applause for the volunteer organization and our review board who worked all year for this. I mentioned this, but seriously, we've got 70 or so volunteers. 30% of those guys and gals are coming into the workforce in the next couple of months. Those of you that are looking for super sharp, I can vouch, hardworking people, grab them. Ask if they're interested. Talk to them. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our Diamond sponsors. It's our partnerships with these sponsors that allow us to put this on. It's extremely expensive to bring food and water and things to the middle of the desert, so we greatly appreciate their partnership. I want to thank Microsoft, Qualys, and RSA. One more piece of housekeeping. We had about 1,900 scanned badges checked in for speaker feedback. At the back of each of these rooms, including the Keynote, there's that little tower with a couple of scanners for your badge. You can scan them as fast as you can. We had about 1,900, 2,000 emails go out mid-afternoon. Please make sure you scan your badge for the speakers. This doesn't give out contact information. You're going to get an email. 5 questions. Help us rate the speakers. Let's provide them feedback. Let's invest in them so they can invest in us. To get this rolling, I want to welcome out Mike Reevey. Apparently Microsoft's pretty serious with their trustworthy computing initiative. So let's give Mike Reevey a warm round of applause. You should see the other guy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, good morning. The other guy is doing just fine. He's a surgeon, still driving around his convertible. It's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, Brian Muirhead. He lives the challenge of take risks, don't fail every day. He's award-winning leadership. He's the guy that built and landed the Pathfinder on Mars on July 4th, 1997. He's delivered front-page results while solving problems that seemed impossible. He was a recipient of NASA's 2 outstanding leadership medals. He was the chief architect of NASA's Constellation Project, which is a program with the objective of establishing a permanent base on the moon and preparing for human exploration of Mars. But he was also the chief engineer of the Mars Science Lab during the invention of the Sky Crane, which is used in the landing of the Curiosity rover. He's currently the chief engineer of the JPL and is a member of the executive council. He's the author of 2 books, Going to Mars and the highly praised High Velocity Leadership. We're very proud and excited to have Brian Muirhead, so please welcome him.
So, are there any entrepreneurs here at Black Hat? Oh, come on, there must be 1 or 2. So, what makes a successful entrepreneur? Somebody who can see a problem and maybe see a solution and maybe can implement, create something? Well, I like the definition that Naveen Jain gave to that question. He said, well, finding problems, I mean, we do that all the time. But let me think of, let's see, we'll call people who can find problems humans. People that can see solutions to the problems, though, they're a little more special. Let's call those people visionaries. And then, what about the people that actually create things, build things, bring things to marketplace? In his view, those are the true entrepreneurs. So the story I'm going to share with you today is a story of a very difficult problem, landing on the surface of another planet, on Mars. Approaches to solving that problem, some very innovative approaches, but mostly I'm going to talk about the people that make these sort of missions possible. Before I continue, I need to give you a little disclaimer. Although I'm a card-carrying rocket scientist, and I do work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, my views, my opinions that I express to you today are my own and not necessarily those of NASA. So, let's begin our story with an experience I had as I met with the CEO of an $18 billion a year organization. I was taking him in to show him the Mars Pathfinder into this huge clean room, showing the spacecraft, and as we walked across this room, he stopped me, looked right at me, and said, Brian, I want you to take risk, but do not fail. Right, what am I going to do with that? Well, I didn't really know a good answer to that. I said, yes, sir. And I stopped and I thought about it, and I thought about it quite a bit, and I realized what the answer is. Every great explorer, from Lewis and Clark to Amundsen, and every great entrepreneur, from a Henry Ford to a Steve Jobs, knows the answer to that riddle. And so does everybody in this room. This answer to taking risk and not failing is being creative in what you do and how you do it. It is the essence of innovation. So, why would the administrator of NASA, a notoriously risk-averse organization, feel the need to take risk? Well, let's look at some data. This is the development cost of a family of missions, deep space planetary missions, from the very first Mars mission almost 50 years ago to our most recent Mars mission, Curiosity, that landed just a year ago. And what you see in this plot is a trend. You see missions becoming less frequent and more expensive until you see that Cassini line there. One guy took a look at this trend and meanwhile was noticing that NASA's budget was going the other way. And he said, we have a major problem here. What can we do to fix it? So what he did is he came out to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and he proposed something really bold. He said, I want to do a new program. I want to call it Discovery. I want to do missions in 3 years, not 5 years, 6 years, or even 10 years. I want to do them for under $200 million. And so far we were okay with all this. And then he said, and I want you guys to land on the surface of Mars. So after we kind of stood up and got off the floor and kind of took our breath, we said, Wes, you want us to, in 3 years, land on the surface of Mars for less than the cost of the movie Titanic? And he said, absolutely. And we said, where do we sign up? This was the beginning of what became the era of faster, 3 years, better, bold new missions, and cheaper, $200 million class missions. And you can see the legacy of that. You see with Pathfinder, following Pathfinder, there's been this trend of very successful missions along those lines. And of course, unfortunately, we're trending back to those old days where now the missions are getting fewer and more expensive. And I'll tell you at the end about something I'm doing to try to reverse that trend once again. So, it turns out that this set of, the limit of that $200 million drove our innovation. I think many of you know, when the constraints are really tight, that's when you get creative. And that's exactly what we did. So what do you do when you start a new project? Well, you figure out what does the customer really want. So on one page, I could lay out 4 things. Demonstrate a simple, reliable way to land on Mars. The second was to demonstrate NASA's commitment to low-cost planetary exploration. Well, what's that about? That was a political objective. That was an objective that NASA wanted to show the White House and Congress we were serious about doing things differently. We're going to demonstrate for the very first time mobility and the usefulness of a rover on the surface of another planet. And of course, we were going to do some great science. Here was the vision. I had a friend in Houston, Texas, paint this, and this is kind of what we woke up thinking about pretty much every day. You know, how could we create this vision on the surface of another planet? Now, it's great to be here in Las Vegas to talk about this. As we readied to launch in 1996, 30 missions had been attempted to land on Mars. Only 8 had been successful. The odds were very much against us at that point. We actually kind of thought the game was rigged because so many missions had failed. But now, as of last year, the odds have improved. Just a little bit, though. We've had more successes, but we've continued to have failures. Landing on Mars is a very hard thing. So, let's go into the story in a little bit more detail. I'd like to introduce you to some very special ladies. They call themselves the 7 Dwarfs. Now, I know this group is pretty sharp, but you figured out there's only 6 ladies there. Well, of course, who didn't want to be in the picture? Well, that would be Grumpy. And what is Grumpy's job? Quality control. What else? But these ladies have a very, very important job. They build the wiring that interconnects all our electronics. They know how important their job is. A mistake that they make that doesn't get discovered can cost us a mission, and these ladies know that. But they taught me something. They really became the epitome of what I look for in a team. And if you remember anything about this talk, I want you to remember my paraphrase, which is, it's the team, stupid. It's all about the people. So what do I look for when I'm putting together a team? First of all, of course, we look for talent. We know what talent looks like. We know how to train it. We know we can find and we buy the talent pretty easily today. Ownership, though. You need people who are going to feel a great sense of commitment, personal commitment to doing their job well. But you also want people that think a little bit like systems people. They're thinking about, is this really the right part of the job? Am I doing the job that really needs to be done? I'm asking you the questions, is this really contributing to the end result? So that kind of sense of ownership is really core to our success. And then lastly, and really importantly, setting up a team environment where there's trust. Trust of the members trusting each other, trust that they have for their management, that they can bring the leadership problems. And then the management has to trust them. If there's somebody on a project that I'm working on, I don't trust them, they're gone. Think of your own situations where you're working with somebody you trust. Think of how efficient that is, how the communication is quick, it's clear. You can make decisions quickly. And think of the opposite. Think of situations where you're working with somebody you don't trust. How difficult that is, how slow and cumbersome that is. So building a team environment where there's trust at every level is really core. Here's our famous rover, Sojourner, the first rover to ever rove on another planet autonomously. This was this is just one of the major innovations. And the key to innovation is a diverse team. We started out with a group of people, a very young team, very widely skilled, a lot of experience, but still relatively limited. Nobody had ever done something like this. And of course, today we also look for people's networks. Who are you connected to? Who do you know that you can bring in to help work and solve a problem? This particular machine, the innovations were the mobility system, which we continue to use on all our rovers, and obviously it performed extremely well on the surface of Mars. Here's a beautiful family portrait of Marie Curie, who was Sojourner's twin sister, and an engineering model of the Spirit and Opportunity, and then a full-scale engineering model of Curiosity. We have 3 generations of innovation here. We started out with 12 kilograms and an ADC-86 processor. That was in the heart of Sojourner. We graduated to Spirit and Opportunity, 180 kilograms, running on an R6000 processor. Now we have Curiosity, 900 kilograms, carrying, basically running on a RAD 750 processor. 3 generations that evolved over the course of basically 20 years. We went from a freshman geologist in Sojourner to a graduate field geologist to a PhD biochemist in Curiosity. But all of these are tied together. All of these are linked through that process of identifying the problems, creating clever solutions, and the people that have made each one of these systems possible. And it's been a core team of us that have done that throughout this time period. This is a very primitive machine compared to most of what we all work with today. This is a single board R6000 processor. And this computer, though, was the most sophisticated computer to have ever flown in deep space at the time we flew it. And of course, it's like 1/100th the performance of the laptop that's running the show today. But it was just one of 25 technologies that we had to invent or reinvent in some cases to make this mission successful. I mean, that is a huge challenge. And the way we did it is we focused the technology, we focused on what the technology needed to do, and we proved it in the heat of battle, in the heat of a project environment. Sometimes technologies just kind of wander on and they look interesting, but they never feel the vacuum of space. When they're in a project environment, we focus them. Now, why all this technology and why this processor? Well, for me, this was a major decision. I got a lot of pushback. So, see, why do you need this new machine? Well, it turned out it was to mitigate risk. I was taking a risk to mitigate what I thought was an even bigger risk. And this is a risk I think most of you have a good feel for. The risk was in the software. Now, I love my software team, but I don't trust them any further than I can throw them. They estimated 30,000 lines of code. Well, how many did it take to get to Mars? 150,000. Typically, that kind of overrun or underestimate would have blown the budget, and blowing the budget would have cost us the mission. We could have been canceled if we did not stay within the budget that we've been given. But this new processor, the new tools that came with it, allowed that team, a very, very, very special team of just 6 programmers who were really, at the core, great systems engineers to start with. That's what made that software job successful. So I'm very proud of all the technology and how that technology is carried forward into the next generations of our Mars missions. Now, I can't think of a better audience to talk about risk with. You know, NASA, we talk about risk all the time. We're in an inherently risky business, and that's exactly where you guys are. So we've created this little way of talking about risk. We use this 5x5 matrix, where you have a likelihood from a 5, which is very high, most likely, very high probability, to 1, a negligible probability. And then consequences, a 5 is loss of mission catastrophic, and a 1 is, of course, negligible. So we start out with a lot of risks up where that 1 is, in the red area. What we're working to do is bring those risks down into the green, down into where that 2 is. But inevitably, and absolutely, I'm sure it's true here for most of you, you're stuck with having done everything you can do and still left with the residual risk that is mission catastrophic. And part of what we do with this story is we communicate it. We let ourselves know, we let our management know, we let the public know that we've done everything we can do, but there's still fairly high inherent risk in what we do. Now, when it comes to risk, it doesn't get any riskier than entry, descent, and landing. This is the process of basically coming from space and getting down to the surface of another planet. And Pathfinder innovated this particular process. We entered directly into the atmosphere of Mars at 8 kilometers a second, 18,000 miles an hour. And 5 minutes later, we had to be down on the surface. Now, I work at a place called JPL. Some people think that stands for just plain lucky. Well, you don't get lucky 42 times in a row, and this town can certainly prove that to you. But that's what this system had to do. So how did we make this process work? Well, we did it through testing, we did it through great engineering, and we did it through very sophisticated software simulation. Because there's only one place in the solar system that you can test this process, and it's at Mars. And that's where we tested it with Mars Pathfinder. Now, I'm going to take you back to the evening of August 5th of last year. And I want to share with you the inner workings, the drama, the technical drama and the human drama associated with entry, descent, and landing of the Mars Science Laboratory and what has been famously called the 7 minutes of terror.
When people look at it, it looks crazy. That's a very natural thing. Sometimes when we look at it, it looks crazy. It is the result of reasoned engineering thought, but it still looks crazy. From the top of the atmosphere down to the surface, it takes us 7 minutes. It takes 14 minutes or so for the signal from the spacecraft to make it to Earth. That's how far Mars is away from us. So when we first get word that we've touched the top of the atmosphere, the vehicle has been alive or dead on the surface for at least 7 minutes.
Entry, descent, and landing, also known as EDL, is referred to as the 7 minutes of terror because we've got literally 7 minutes to get from the top of the atmosphere to the surface of Mars, going from 13,000 miles an hour to 0 in perfect sequence, perfect choreography, perfect timing, and the computer has to do it all by itself with no help from the ground. If any one thing doesn't work just right, it's game over.
We slam into the atmosphere and develop so much aerodynamic drag. Our heat shield, it heats up and it glows like the surface of the sun. 1,600 degrees.
During entry, the vehicle is not only slowing down violently through the atmosphere, but also we are guiding it like an airplane to be able to land in a very narrow constrained space. This is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, and one that we had never attempted on Mars.
Mars is actually really hard to slow down because it has just enough atmosphere that you have to deal with it. Otherwise, it will destroy your spacecraft. On the other hand, it doesn't have enough atmosphere to finish the job. We're still going about 1,000 miles an hour. So at that point, we use a parachute.
The parachute is the largest and strongest supersonic parachute that we've ever built to date. It has to be able to withstand 65,000 pounds of force, even though the parachute itself only weighs about 100 pounds.
When it opens up that fast, it's a neck-snapping 9 Gs.
At that point, we have to get that heat shield off. It's like a big lens cap blocking our view of the ground to the radar. The radar has to take just the right altitude and velocity measurements at just the right time, or the rest of the landing sequence won't work.
This big, huge parachute that we've got, it'll only slow us down to about 200 miles an hour. And that's not slow enough to land. So we have no choice, but we've got to cut it off and then come down in rockets. Once we turn those rocket motors on, if we don't do something, we're just going to smack right back into the parachute. So the first thing we do is make this really radical divert maneuver. We fly off to the side.
Diverting away from the parachute, killing our horizontal velocity and our vertical velocity, getting the rover moving straight up and down so it can look at the surface with its radar and see where we're going to land. And we head straight down to the bottom of a crater, right beside a 6-kilometer high mountain.
We can't get those rocket engines too close to the ground, because if we were to descend propulsively with our engines all the way to the ground, we would essentially create this massive dust cloud. That dust cloud could then go and land on the rover. It could damage mechanisms and it could damage instruments. So the way we solve that problem is by using the skycram maneuver.
20 meters above the surface, we have to lower the rover below us on a tether that's 21 feet long, and then gently deposit it on its wheels on the surface.
As the rover touches down and is now on the ground, the descent stage is in a collision course with the rover. We must cut the bridle immediately and fly the descent stage to a safe distance from the rover.
I still get tears in my eyes when I remember that moment, and I remember also the moment on July 4th, 1997. So you probably have read, maybe Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, I knew the technology, and so did everybody you saw in that video, but it still felt like magic to us. But this was an incredible example of extraordinary human effort, great testing, but the only place this job could really be proven was right there on Mars. And obviously it worked exactly as we designed it, and actually better than we had any reason to expect. But it's interesting when you think about it from a risk point of view. We literally bet the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's future on this mission. That's a pretty bold thing to do. We did dare mightily. So let's continue our story. I want to go back to Mars Pathfinder and the innovations we pioneered there. You've probably read Clay Christensen. He talks about disruptive technologies. Well, the sky crane was disruptive. The airbag was disruptive. This was completely novel. The only thing that had ever landed on Mars before was propulsively. And we went back to that with sky crane. Here we invented something that had never been done before. We used airbags. And we were able to do that because of Tom Revellini. And Tom, you saw Tom in the EDL video. Now, Tom's a smart guy, but nobody had ever built an airbag before. Nobody had ever been able to develop and demonstrate such a thing. But what made Tom successful wasn't his IQ. It was what Daniel Goleman coined the term of as EQ, emotional intelligence. What made Tom and the airbag team successful was their drive, their judgment, their resilience when things went wrong, to pick themselves up and go back in, fix the problems, and get back into test. When I'm looking for talent today, when I go to hire people, I look more for EQ. I can find IQ all over the place. I'm looking for people who have that drive, that passion, that when they talk about what they've done in the past and what they want to do in the future, I see that light, that fire in their eyes. That's what I hire for today. And it's very interesting. My good friend Tom just unfortunately left the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He went up to work for Apple. And I think they saw the same thing in him that I saw in him, this great drive. And we wish him great success. So here's some of more of our key parts of making a system possible. And I'm sure this applies in your world as well. The key to success isn't take risk, don't fail, or faster, better, cheaper. The mantra we used was test, test, test. When you're doing things that are basically one fault away from failure, the only way you can really verify the performance is testing. So we tested everything we could, as best we could, here on Earth. But the only way we could ultimately prove it was at Mars. So testing is fundamental to our success. And here's the proof of that success. This is an image from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter flying over Mars at 400 kilometers, looking down, very precisely predicted by our team, and seeing the parachute and the lander coming down at basically 200 miles an hour. This is the first set of rocket-assisted deceleration systems that we invented. And this was not part of our original architecture. Originally, we were going to use parachutes and airbags. That's all we needed. But one of our engineers, who's, in my view, he's prescient. He can see the future. He said, you know what's going to happen? This lander's going to get heavy, and that parachute's only can get so big. And at some point, we're going to be coming down too fast for those airbags to work. We need to put something else in there to make the system more robust. And I like to encourage that kind of thinking everywhere I can. How do we protect against the unknown unknowns? And that's what robustness does. And it turned out Dara was absolutely right. We needed this rocket-assisted system. Because what it did is it dealt with the fact that as we were coming down too fast, and just a few seconds before touchdown, not unlike the sky crane, we lit up these engines. It brought us to a dead stop above the surface of Mars, and then we landed with the airbag. And the airbag was designed to land at about a 65 mile an hour head-on collision with the surface of Mars. And this made sure it wasn't any worse than that. But develop robust solutions, really fundamental in developing complex systems. And of course, the sky crane, as you saw, is exactly that. It's a very robust system. But here again, The only place we actually tested this was on Mars. We tested the pieces, we tested the engines, we tested the sky crane deployments, but we never tested this whole system end to end here on Earth. We trusted our analysis, we trusted our tools, we trusted ourselves enough that this would work. And of course, a lot of people said, just like they said about the airbags, this is pretty crazy. I really have a lot of doubts as to whether it's going to work. But once it landed, everybody said, God, I want a sky crane on my mission. Everybody sees something successful, they want to copy it. And we're building a new mission that relies on the sky crane again. Communication. We all know how important communication is. These are antennas in Australia. We have some in Spain, some in California. We can keep track of our spacecraft 24/7. But effective communication is really hard. It takes a lot of effort. And we actually lost a mission because of bad communication. We lost the Mars Climate Orbiter because of poor communication between a navigator who said, this isn't going the way it's supposed to go, and a management team that wasn't paying attention. And there just wasn't enough communication. And if there had been, that mission would have been successful. So I look to communicate, I over-communicate as necessary to make sure our teams, especially diverse teams, understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. This is a Pathfinder spacecraft at Kennedy Space Center. Last time we would see it until the surface of Mars. And take risks, don't fail doesn't mean you don't have failures. You have a lot of failures. You have a lot of problems on the ground. And here, we had a problem, something we'd done a dozen times, and all of a sudden it wasn't working. And we were just days away from launch. We were about ready to lose the mission because of this. But what kicked in was part of our culture that we'd developed, and it was about rapid decision making. The ability to make decisions quickly, to draw knowledge, experience from the people on the front lines, what I call micro-knowledge, get them together, understand the problem, formulate a solution, and implement it right away. That's the hallmark of a successful organization, rapid decision making. We put that in place. That was in place when this very late problem showed up. We knew what to do. Within days, we had the problem fixed, and we were back in business. Being in business, of course, means you also want to have some fun. So we get a chance to share what we do with our kids. And here was a time where we took one of our early prototypes, took the metal wheels off, kind of hard on the kids, and went out and showed them how rovers really work. But part of what keeps a team working very efficiently and effectively and at highest performance is having personal relationships, a personal connection between the members of the team. That's part of the role of leadership, is to build that. And having fun is a really good way to do that. This is another special team, like the Seven Dwarfs. This is the team that built and did the final assembly of the Pathfinder spacecraft. And similar teams face similar problems on Curiosity. This is a Russian doll. It's pieces inside of pieces inside of pieces that all then have to come apart again when we get to the surface of Mars. This team was a very high-performance team. What that means is they were personally committed to each other's performance and each other's success. That kind of performance or that kind of commitment at a personal level really drives success in a high-performance team. But I learned something from them. And what I learned was that the role of leaders provide glue and grease. Well, what does that mean? That's kind of paradoxical. Well, we know glue, that's what holds things together. Glue is what a leader does in keeping the team focused. But I think almost more importantly, it's the grease. It's what we do to break down the barriers, to cut through the red tape, to facilitate workers getting their jobs done. That's really a fundamental role of leadership. So, after all this design work, all this testing, all this analysis, it's showtime. It's time to bring the product to the marketplace. And for me, actually, launching Pathfinder, I felt, man, we should have gotten declared successful at that point, because we were on schedule and on budget. Something a lot of people said was really impossible. So, I talked about the role of an entrepreneur in execution. Well, we missed the center of that aeroellipse which is 200 kilometers long, by only 20 kilometers. One of our navigators said that's like a hole-in-one from LA to Houston. That's what I call precision execution. But we've continued to build on that, and we started with Viking at 300 kilometers, Pathfinder at 200, MSL was down to 20 kilometers. At some point in the not too distant future, we'll be able to land in this room. That's real precision execution. That's where we're going. Now, what would I expect to find on Mars? In my dreams, I find Wyvern the Martian. Because what we've been about in exploring Mars is answering a fundamental question that humans have asked of themselves from the beginning of time. And that question is, are we alone? And Mars is a unique laboratory for asking and answering that question. And we started out with Sojourner looking at the geology. Then we went to follow the water, knowing that wherever we find water on Earth, we find life. And now, with Sojourner, or with Curiosity, we have a machine that actually has landed in a place where we know there's water, and we are finding evidence of the habitability of life. We haven't found any life yet, but we're still looking. So what did we really find? This is the first image that came down on the morning of July 4th, and we had very carefully planned this. We had hoped, if we got to the surface, if we could create this image, which is a mosaic of 6 images, if we could get that image on the front page of the New York Times, or maybe the LA Times, and that the mission would be declared a success. Well, it turned out this picture was on the front page of every newspaper, pretty much every newspaper and magazine on the planet, as I think, for me, an example of the pride that the world took in what is really a human accomplishment. It's not a JPL or NASA accomplishment. It's really a human accomplishment to do something this bold, this daring, and this successfully. And we repeated it again with spirit and opportunity, and even more fantastically with Curiosity. But it's important to celebrate this. And, we did a very good job of sharing with our team and with the rest of the community the value of what we communicated. The hours that had been worked, the struggles that we'd gone through, the failures that we'd persevered through. It's very important to celebrate success, obviously at the end, but also as during the development. And of course, this is the first great image that came down from Curiosity. So you see her spacecraft, part of her landing system, and you see the shadow, and you see Mount Sharp. So this again, that night, the night we landed on just about a year ago, we had clear evidence that we had a very, very successful system. Now, on the night of July 4th, we had a problem. We had lost communication with Sojourner. And we'd tried everything we would normally do. We hit the on-off button. We tried switching everything we could switch, and still nothing happened. So that night, my girlfriend and I had 2 bottles of champagne in the refrigerator, nice California wine, and a Dom Perignon. Well, we drank the California wine that night because we weren't sure if how the mission would play without Sojourner being operational. But the next day, we were back in communication. The computer on board had reset, and that would have been the next thing we did, and that cleared the comm link. And so we scrambled because we didn't know what had caused that problem. And we got Sojourner down on the surface of Mars. At this point, she was ready to do her mission. She was designed to operate for just 7 days. She operated for 7 months. Spirit and Opportunity were designed to operate for 3 months. Spirit has operated for over 8 years now. So we have very, very sophisticated, very well-designed systems that have proven themselves in the surface of Mars. Of course, Curiosity, not to be outdone, decided to show off by doing a donut on the surface of Mars. You probably can't see it, but in those tracks, there's a repeating pattern. And JPL, in its sense of humor and a little bit of pride, built into the wheels a Morse code that puts out JPL every time the wheel rolls. So all across the surface of Mars is JPL, and so we're kind of proud of that. We didn't tell anybody we were doing that, by the way. We just did it. So I wanted to step back to risk a little bit, because again, I think that's such a big part of what you guys wrestle with here at Black Hat. And this is about paradigms. Pathfinder was developed under a very risk-tolerant strategy. We were taking risk. We were told to take risk. So we got to be really creative about taking those risks, and it paid off handsomely. But between Pathfinder's success and Spirit and Opportunities, there were 2 failures. And the pendulum of risk went from, yeah, we're open to it, to hell no. And so what you see is Pathfinder's landing site, a very, very interesting, rocky, kind of exciting place from a science point of view. And the Spirit and Opportunity went looking for some place that was really safe. And we did it. We took 2 spacecraft, just in case one of them failed. So the risk paradigm really changed. And what's important to think about and be aware of is, as you're designing something, as you're planning something, make sure you understand the risk paradigm and be very careful if it looks like it might change, because it'll drive your system, it'll drive your cost, and it can drive the success of what you're trying to do. Now here's a very special picture. This is the first hole we've ever drilled on the surface of another planet, and this was drilled at a rock we call John Klein. And John Klein was a good friend of mine and a good friend of all of ours who died before the mission had completed, or had landed actually. And so we named this rock after him, and it turned out it was a great rock for doing the first drilling and giving us the first insight into the real chemistry in this area. And it showed that Mars was habitable. Didn't show us any bugs, it didn't show us any the building blocks of life, but it showed us the chemistry of life is there. So now we're going to continue to look and try to find evidence of the real thing. And here's where we're going. We're going up on a road trip up what we call Mount Sharp. And at the top of along the way, we expect to find other evidence of waterborne activity and maybe even some evidence of biochemistry. We'll see. But that's what this mission is all about. Now, I'd like to finish with just an interesting step away from the surface of Mars to something that is really built on what I've been talking to you about. It's built on taking risk. It's built on being very innovative about how you do things. And it's also got an element of culture change. And it's called, I'm sorry, I missed one slide. This is an important chart because I've also worked in human spaceflight. And one day humans will go to Mars. And I'd love to send them to Valles Marineris. This is the Grand Canyon of Mars. The geology and the potential for discovery in a place like that is enormous. So someday I think humans will be on Mars, and I would love to be there to see them, or love to be around to see that day. So back to my closing chart. This is a mission that NASA is just studying. We've only studied it for about 6 months. It's a really bold concept. And it's a concept to capture a 1,000-ton asteroid and bring it back to the Earth-Moon system and put it into orbit around the moon so that astronauts can go to it and explore it. It has the potential for a lot of other things, for other missions that can follow it. But this is a really, really bold idea. And for it to be successful, it's going to have to rely on a lot of the things that we've just been talking about. The ability and willingness to take risk, to be creative about how you do the job, for strong leadership, for great communication, for teams that are committed to each other as well as to the success of the mission. So I would like to close with an admonition. I want each of you to go out in your jobs, and I want you to take risk, but do not fail. Thank you very much. So we have an opportunity for questions. I would love to give you further insights if there's anything you'd like to know. You can probably ask me questions about NASA that I can't answer, but I'd be willing to try. So are there any questions? I can't believe this is such a shy group. Oh, yeah, go. There's a microphone up behind you so everybody can hear.
How do you know you have not introduced life onto Mars with some of the landing?
Very, very good question. There's a special process we call planetary protection. And we do things for, we sterilize, for example. The Viking lander, which was the first lander on Mars, was actually put into an oven and sterilized at, let's see, about 104 degrees Celsius for like a number of hours. It was basically baked. And that killed off most of the microbes on that vehicle. Since then, we've modified that policy and that practice. And at the point where we're actually going to look for life, then we're going to have to reassert that kind of rigor to make sure we don't contaminate the targets. And so that's, again, part of the process. Also, planetary protection applies to what we might bring back. Someday we're going to bring back material from Mars. And we need to very carefully make sure that whatever we bring back from the surface has been encapsulated in such a way that it can't get out and actually, in case of an accident, be released on the surface of Earth. The Andromeda Strain movie story lives long in our memory. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Any perfect plan have a plan B, C, or just is a perfect plan with no choice to fail?
You're saying when we plan these things, do we have backup plans?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at the level of the mission, no. But we have all kinds of contingency plans that are built in. We do enormous amount of work looking at what could go wrong. Our entry, descent, and landing system on Curiosity, that started out as basically what we call single string. In other words, one failure, one device that didn't activate, one resistor, one capacitor, one integrated circuit that had a failure, one bad line of code could cost us the whole entry, descent, and landing system. We would basically lose the mission at that point. So we implemented, toward the end of the mission, a backup system, and that basically would give us an opportunity to survive a single event, but not multiple events. So we do a lot of work in contingency planning. Our spacecraft are designed with what we call fault protection. I'm sure you guys think about that a lot. So when a certain when a certain event occurs, we have a pre-programmed response. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of money proving out those systems. So let's see, I think way over there.
Yes, hello. Just interested in what your perspective is on the New Horizons mission to Pluto as a contrast to planetary landings.
Well, we evolved from the space program started out doing simple flybys. The first Mars mission, Mariner 4, was a flyby. And then we graduated to more sophisticated missions of orbiting. And then we've graduated to actual surface landing. So New Horizons is a flyby. It's the best we could do to actually explore the only body that we have not explored in our solar system, our demoted Pluto. So right here.
What's about the documentation in the different process steps? How you judge how much documentation is needed for each step?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that question.
What's about the documentation? If you plan a project, how much documentation you do for every step? How much paperwork?
How much paperwork do we do for every step? Well, that's an interesting question because we have different classes of projects. We have like Class A to Class D. And the big difference between a Class A project and a Class D is actually the amount of paper. Mars Pathfinder really relied much more on people than paper. We used people's judgment, we used people's decision-making authority. We didn't cover everything over with paper, and we trusted people to make those calls. We checked up on them, but that's the biggest difference, in my view, between a Class A project, which is very expensive, versus a Class C or D project, which is much less expensive. The quality of what's on the launch pad is still basically the same. It's just the amount of paper behind it that supports it. Yes, sir.
What was your personal reaction the first time someone raised the idea of Sky Crane?
Well, I was in the room when we made that decision. I was the chief engineer of Mars Science Laboratory at that time. And what we had done, we've been looking at how many ways can we land on the surface of Mars. And we'd done propulsive, we'd done airbags, but we had this much bigger rover. And we knew that the approaches we'd taken before then would not work. The risk was too high. And we'd explored the idea of Sky Crane before, but it was just kind of one of those processes in an engineering environment where you've basically looked at everything, you've evaluated the risks, and you said, this may look crazy, but it is the right answer. And believe me, we did that was like in 2002. And we basically spent the next 10 years convincing people it was the right answer. And they didn't believe us until basically a year ago when we proved it. But it was, as the video said, it was very, very well-reasoned engineering. Anything else would have been higher risk. And even though this one looked like it was pretty wild. Yes, sir.
Sir, the rover engineering team has done some great online Q&As.
Yes.
And Chris Hadfield is playing us guitar via YouTube from space. Given the growing public outreach and support, do you think there's any potential for crowdsourcing NASA, either financially or politically?
God, I'd love it. Well, the problem with my new study, the asteroid redirect mission, is funding. We can't get a commitment from the Congress to support it. Unfortunately, these missions are pretty expensive. And so we'd love to have the public involved, the public support. We know there's a lot of support. The problem is that we still have to work through the Congress. So we'll see how that plays out over time. We think we've got continued. Congress has been really the fundamental supporter of NASA. They drive what it is we do. And right now in this environment, it's just very difficult to get the money we need for something as bold as the redirect mission. But our new missions to Mars and other missions, those are continuing. Yes, sir.
In every large organization, there seems to be elements that confuse the process for the product. And so that's a pitfall which makes risk challenging to take because there are people that will use the bureaucracy to avoid it. How did you have a strategy to deal with that issue?
Well, there's two ways to do that. One is you do it right up front. You hit it head on. Another way is you kind of do it sub rosa. And for Pathfinder, we were actually kind of operating off the radar screen. A lot of people thought we would not be successful. They didn't even want to be associated with us. So because of that, we were able to write our own rule book. Nobody had ever done a planetary mission like this at this risk level. And so we were given enormous latitude, but we had a lot of support. Our leadership at JPL and leadership at NASA headquarters trusted us to do the job. And because of that trust, we were able to be very, very efficient. So that gets back to that trust theme. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of trust in the government environment these days. So things are expensive, things are slow, things are cumbersome. I would love to get back to that point where somebody, you tell them what you're going to do, they trust you to go do it, you report back, they don't micromanage you. And when there's trust, you can really be very, very efficient. Yes, I use that a lot. I ask forgiveness and not permission. Now, that works really well for me. So, anyway, yes, sir?
If you can answer without laughing, what do you think of the Mars One project? The Mars One project to land people there and leave them?
Oh, Inspire Mars, Dennis Tito's project?
I think that's the one.
Okay, yeah. This is a concept that Dennis Tito, who was the first space tourist, came up with, where we could actually launch in 2018 and fly around Mars and do what we call a free return. In other words, we don't have to do any propulsive maneuver at Mars, and it will come back naturally to the Earth. I've actually met with Dennis Tito.
Actually, it's the other one, the one that landed plan to land people there and leave them there?
Okay. Well, that one's, I think Buzz Aldrin has been supporting that. That one I haven't spent any time with. I know how hard it is to get down to the surface of Mars and how hard it is to operate. And in my work in the human program, I've seen how hard it is to keep humans alive in space. That is way beyond, I think, our capability to do today. This idea of flying around the Mars and coming back, that's a 500-day mission. The idea of two people in a space capsule living through that is really a pretty amazing thing to consider. I don't know if he'll have enough money to do it, but it'd be interesting to see if he can pull it off. It'll be a great experiment in human psychology. Yes, sir.
You talked about actually landing people on Mars. You had pointed out where you wanted to put them on Mars, and the gentleman's question just before your answer highlighted numerous problems in getting people to Mars. Which of these many and numerous problems is JPL or NASA actually working on to try and solve at this point?
Well, we're working on a lot of them. The problem is we don't have enough resources really to work them seriously enough to actually solve them in the near term. The hardest problem is landing a lot of payload on the surface of Mars. As we went from Pathfinder to Spirit and Opportunity and then to Curiosity, we've come up against the limits of what we can land. Curiosity is almost 900. It's 900 kilograms. You add the descent stage, and you're looking at under 2 metric tons. To do human missions to Mars, you need 40 metric tons, 50, even more. Huge systems. So you need a different kind of technology to land than we have today. We know what that might be, but the development is just beginning. So we've got a long way to go to get humans to Mars. The other aspect is life support. How do you keep humans alive for long periods of time reliably? We have trouble keeping them alive, at space station, where we can resupply very quickly. Boy, once you're on the way to Mars, that's it. You've got everything you've got to keep you alive, you're taking with you. How do you design a system that can do that? That's a real exciting challenge, and we're just, I think, just beginning to scratch the surface of that one. Yes, sir, way over there.
I'm just curious, how much research is NASA and JPL doing in non-conventional propulsion, high-yield energy sources, and even the possibility of non-carbon-based life?
What was the last? Oh, non-carbon-based, yeah. We're doing, for example, the asteroid redirect mission relies on a new, significant scale-up in the capability of solar electric propulsion, which we think is really a great tool for robotic and human exploration. There's a lot of talk of other, like nuclear thermal and other approaches to advanced propulsion. All of that, again, it depends on the resources. We kind of know the physics, but it's the engineering that's really hard. So we're continuing to push that. Looks like we're about down to our last minute. Maybe one last question, Trey? Let's see here. Ma'am.
Do you rely in any kind of artificial intelligence for your decision-making process?
Do we rely on artificial intelligence for
this decision-making process, like, for example, Bayesian networks
Yeah.
or neural networks,
Yeah.
decision-making?
No. We actually don't use any of those techniques in our flight spacecraft. That technology has not gotten to the point where it will really, in my view, really be useful to us. We need very fast, real-time response, which is potential in these sort of systems. But we've found it's simpler to basically hard code those kind of solutions than use that kind of innovation. Now, as we look at the future, more sophisticated, more complex systems like humans, keeping humans alive in deep space for long periods of time, I think that may very much have a real value at that point. Well, thank you very much. It's been a real great pleasure to join you here at Black Hat.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. Guys, just a couple of announcements very, very quickly. First, I want a big round of applause for yourselves. We went from 7,000 people last year to just over 7,500. We're almost to 8,000 people at the show this year. Thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate that.